Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Pascal Vrebos' play Ceci n'est vraiment pas une pipe, or in English, This is not a real pipe. This, of course, derives its name from the famous Magritte painting, one of the great Belgian artists. And it's a play. So according to David Willinger, editor of 4 Millennial Plays from Belgium, where I'm reading this play out of, pipe in French can mean a pipe, smoking pipe, right? But it's also slang for a blowjob. And so this play, Vrebos' play, centers around the experience of Jean-Jacques Hamilton, who is a thinly veiled stand-in for Dominique Strauss-Kahn, who was an actual French politician who got in trouble for allegedly coercing a maid in a New York hotel room into sexual activity. And this sort of revealed, this sort of led to the revelation of a long history of sexual improprieties of various kinds, etc., that Strauss-Kahn had engaged in. What Vrebos does is takes that premise, powerful French politician and business person coerces, possibly, allegedly, a female immigrant worker of color into sex acts, and it destroys his reputation. Vrebos fictionalizes it. He changes the name to Jean-Jacques Hamilton, and Mariama as the maid. But the thing that he does that's very, very interesting is Vrebos tries to undercut an easy judgment about this situation, right? Because it is very easy to jump to a conclusion, and realistically, it's probably an accurate conclusion. There was according to Willinger, there was a film made about Strauss-Kahn, in which it pretty much is straightforwardly saying that he raped her. But Vrebos resists that impulse and instead stages the encounter in a multitude of different ways, told sort of from the perspectives of different people, some of whom were real, like, well, JJH, Jean-Jacques Hamilton. Dominique Strauss-Kahn was popularly known as DSK, and so Vrebos has followed that formula with JJH. So it's told from the perspective of Mariama, or her lawyer, more accurately. It's told from the perspective of JJH's wife. It's told from the perspective of one of his old friends. So it's told from these different perspectives, many of whom would have been real people. But we also have X, who is a spy, alias Borderline. We have Helen, who's an undercover cop working in special operations. So we have these figures who are less likely to be real. I don't know that much about the DSK case. The only thing I know is what the introduction here said. But it's less likely that this was some sort of grand conspiracy or elaborate sting operation, spy operation, something like this. The sordid truth is it's more likely that you had a powerful, wealthy white man coerce sex from a impoverished immigrant of color, and that's probably the reality. But Vrebos doesn't allow us that. What we get, again, is a whole bunch of scenes, and I'm going to take you through what they generally deal with. So the first one actually comes in scene 2, because these are punctuated by scenes in which JJH is talking to someone. Unclear exactly who. It does seem to be a psychiatrist, but there are references that raise questions about that. But so scene 2 gives us the first instance, and this is told by a guy named Jimmy Rockmaster, who is Mariama's lawyer. And he gives us the most graphic, brutal scenario out of the play. So each scene has some common elements. Each replaying of this encounter has some common elements. Mariama is in the hotel room. JJH enters from the bathroom. Usually, I think he's always naked with a towel in his hand, but maybe he's sometimes wrapped in the towel. But he enters naked, and then they encounter one another. So, Rockmaster's description of what is going on alongside this being acted out by Mariama and JJH is quite brutal. I'm gonna forego reading it because it is fairly graphic, but essentially this is a standard violent rape, the way that we often think of rape. In scene 4, the next telling, we have Marianne, who is JJH's wife, and she very much defends him, taking the position that he essentially has been slandered, right? So at one point she says, "Everything they're all saying is nothing but filthy libel. My husband is incapable of so much as the slightest drop of violence. Even a mosquito he's incapable of crushing. That woman, it's entrapment pure and simple. All the women run after him. It's his charm, his position. Power draws money the way slime draws cockroaches. The poor man spends all his time saying no, but sometimes he folds. There have been times I've folded too. So what? That's life. A little Betty buy, some wham bam, thank you ma'am, a drop of mucal fluid exchange, no big deal." And then addressing JJH. "You know, I love you, almost the same as at the very start." She seems at first quite reasonable, right? She seems naive and overly trusting of her husband, who we have every reason to believe from his own admissions, though they are somewhat contradictory, that he regularly cheats on her and he feels no remorse for doing so. So Marianne's initial sort of devotion to her husband seems fairly reasonable, naive, but reasonable. But she does end up by essentially accusing Mariama of being a prostitute. And so I feel like we lose a lot of sympathy for her by the end. Scene 6, we get another one, Borderline. Borderline is a secret agent who has been observing Mariama. Essentially, in this scenario, Mariama is a spy who has been attempting to steal secrets from JJH's possessions, and when she's caught in the room, she seduces him to get out of any suspicion. The next scenario we get in scene 8, we have Pierre-Yves, who is a sort of tabloid journalist, paparazzi type figure who's been following JJH around and basically sort of compiling information about his sexual escapades. And what he says basically is that he has a set of regular women in different cities around the world that JJH regularly visits when he goes to those cities, and Mariama is one of them. In scene 12, we get Helen, who's a special agent, and this is perhaps the most bizarre theory, that JJH is basically in a conspiracy with Mariama and another guy to ruin his reputation, get drummed out of politics, and so that he can just sort of fade into obscurity and live a quiet, peaceful life. And then our final one, scene 14, Robert Hammond, who is JJH's lawyer, tells his version of things, in which basically Mariama is a prostitute who attempts to blackmail JJH for more money. And Hammond very much victim blames. He does the old, oh, could you imagine such a frail old man possibly forcefully raping this very manly, strong woman? No, that couldn't happen. All this bullshit. I mean, he paints an excessively sort of statesmanly picture of JJH and an excessively villainous picture of Mariama. And so the thing that's interesting about Vrebos's play, when we take all of these scenes together, is that it definitely undercuts any real certainty about what happened, right? And so in this sense, it does draw attention to the problem of jumping to conclusions about salacious rumors and things like this. Now, this is something of an ethical gray area, I think, because on the one hand, and I mean, this is something, this play, when did this premiere? 2013. So I think the Me Too movement really sort of illustrated some issues here, because on the one hand, you have the very, I'd say, accurate sort of concern about people being innocent until proven guilty, right? On the other hand, the default tendency is often to blame victims of sexual violence within patriarchal societies. And so I don't think Vrebos is doing something wrong or evil here, but saying, oh, we don't know, we can't know, there's a number of possibilities, does really open the door for those who want to say, well, maybe we shouldn't believe survivors of sexual violence necessarily. They really have to prove what happened. And again, that's a problematic conundrum, and I don't have a good answer for it, because on the one hand, yes, an accusation should not be taken as positive proof for any sort of wrongdoing. On the other hand, sexual assault seems to be uniquely doubted within patriarchal societies. And so a play that encourages us to say, well, there could be more to the story, does risk reinforcing those biases, right? Does risk reinforcing the, well, maybe she consented at the time and then regretted it afterwards. Maybe she was giving off mixed signals. Maybe she was whatever it was. And in that sense, it is really quite an ethical gray area. And again, I don't know what as a society we should do to try and navigate that or make that legal and cultural space more navigable. But the other thing I want to say about Vrebos' play, there's another thing that Willinger put in the introduction that I think is really striking. So there's not that much about Belgian plays as such available in English. So people in the US, my country, the UK, etc., are not necessarily super, like there's not a ton of material out there for people who are interested in contemporary Belgian drama, unless you read/speak French and possibly Dutch. But one of the things that I have started to get the sense of with Belgian theater, Francophone Belgian theater especially, is that it is a fairly conservative type of theater, leaning more into French plays, leaning more into sort of traditional, the traditional French canon, not necessarily as much contemporary, more sort of experimental French drama. So one of the things that Willinger says here is that Vrebos, who's also a television talk show host and magazine editor and thus ensconced in the center of the Belgian establishment, has had his plays consistently produced at all the leading theaters of Brussels, and yet this play, arguably his best, has merely had a staged reading in an outlying Brussels neighborhood at the Centre Culturel de Wolfhoom-Saint-Lambert. Why? Because it goes too far into a realm of questionable taste, but when one compares it to the works of Sarah Kane, for example, it's quite tame, which is a commentary on what the market will bear in Francophone Belgium. It is a play about sexual violence, and it is a play that does stage a violent rape. That's fair. That's fair. That people don't necessarily want to see that on stage. But it is a striking observation about the general tenor of Francophone Belgian theater, that conservatism, good taste, these sorts of things do seem to reign